doctor can only prescribe doom. It's Dr. Harold Shipman. Shipman has been a well-respected and liked general practitioner and considered a pillar of the community, the way that all good serial killers are, until another GP surgeon began to get suspicious of Shipman's patients having a high mortality rate. It was then revealed that Shipman had been killing dozens of his patients, actually 215 to 250 to be precise, and had done so for years, almost completely undetected. In fact, some believe his count may actually be closer to 500. Shipman killed remorselessly, but it's likely he only ever did it for kicks and thrills and knowing he was getting away with it. Shipman was caught after suspicions being raised after a will from one of his patients he killed cited him as the sole heir, cutting out her own family. Shipman forged this will, his ego thinking somehow he'd get away with it. Of course it would make sense for a stranger to leave her whole life to me. Her doctor she has no personal relationship with. I'm me, I'm perfect. Shipman was found guilty for 15 murders and 1 count of fraud, being sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, and he took his own life in a cell in 2004, never confessing to his crimes or giving a reason for all the overcompensating granny theft. Fire festival, but make it 16th century. The Batavia. Alright, so this has some Lord of the Flies energy for sure. The Batavia was a ship bound for the West Indies carrying 341 people, a mix of civilians, soldiers, and working men. So tensions are high from day one. Lot of dudes, not many chicks, no firm leading hand to guide the ship socially, and then wham! Ship crashes on June 4th of 1629. They had managed to rescue some of the provisions from the wreck, including barrels of biscuits and some water, but the commander Pelsat and some crew ditch these 268 other losers and go find fresh water and help, which takes them 33 days to reach. In the meantime, those 33 days on the island are enough for Cornelius to decide to build a weird empire. Firstly, he tricks a party into believing that water could be found on the Seals Island. Upon landing there in their little ship, the group found no water. Cornelius then sends his henchmen to finish them off. Next, he drowned people by sending them out in boats on useless errands where his accomplices would push them overboard. Then, he instructed a group of soldiers under the command of Weeb Hayes to go explore the High Island. Before they left, he confiscated all their arms. He didn't expect them to return. After all, that was the same direction which Pelsat had gone 30-some days ago, and he never came back. Lo and behold, a smoke signal means Hayes did find water, which complicates matters for Cornelius. He was in danger of them warning any approaching rescue ship of his Lord of the Flies actions he'd been doing. He tries to woo Hayes over to the dark side. Hayes says, nah bro, island living. So Cornelius tries to duke it out and loses spectacularly to Hayes, who locks his ass up. Pelsat takes 63 days to find the wreck site again, almost double the time it took the ship's boat to get to Batavia. When he arrives, he learned of Cornelius had killed and pilfered and enslaved those around him and condemned the mutineers to have their right hands cut off. In the case of Cornelius, both, before being put to death on gallows. Double trouble with these sisters, Delphine and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? At least a lot better than most prolific murder partnership, which is the title given by the Guinness World of Records in a dubious honor to their horrific 91 known slayings. They shopped from home, pulling victims from the brothel El Rancho de Angel that they ran in Mexico. There's not much information on the Gonzalez family, despite the fact that the sisters were actually caught alongside their 2 other sisters who were seen as accomplices, and that their crimes were committed in the 21st century, where police and scientific progress can provide a lot more detail. The police picked up a woman named Josefina Gutierrez, a procuress, on suspicion of devious behavior in the Guantero area, and during questioning, she implicated the 2 sisters' crimes. Police officers searched the sisters' property and found the bodies of 11 men and 80 women, a total of over 91 people. Investigations revealed the sisters' scheme was that of to recruit women through help wanted ads, though the ads would state the girls would become maids for the 2 sisters, not adult services in a brothel. Many of the girls are force-fed substances once they arrived, and the sisters reportedly killed the girls when they became too ill, too physically damaged, lost their looks, or stopped pleasing customers. They would also do anything to customers that showed up with large amounts of cash, asked too many questions, saw too many of their girls, or were just kicking it around too much. And when asked for an explanation for deaths of family and friends, one sister reportedly said to People the food didn't agree with them. Both received 40-year sentences in 1964. This would probably be the worst plumbing call to ever receive, so let's visit Dennis Nilsson. As a miserable junior constable in London, he began to drink alone in the evenings and began visiting gay bars where he engaged in casual liaisons with other men, having having fought the long fight of accepting his own sexual identity. A year later, he left the police and began to work as a civil servant in a job center. Between the years of 1978 and 1983, Dennis Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 men and is believed to have attempted on further 7 people. At first, Nilsen kept the bodies under the floorboards of his Melrose apartment until they had decomposed too much to gain gratification from, and they emitted the gnarly scent of rotten person that attracted insects. He therefore decided to burn all of them in a bonfire in his garden, disguising the smell with a melting car tire too. In mid-1981, Nilsen's landlord decided to renovate the ground floor apartment, offering him $1,000 to vacate, which he happily accepted before burning the last few bodies he was retaining. Dennis moved to 23 Cranley Gardens in London, where he went from a floorboard storage to attempting to dispose of flesh organs and smaller bones by shoving them down a toilet. Seeing as toilets can't even handle a tampon, it consequently blocked all the pipes, which surprisingly led to Nilsen himself calling an emergency draining company. Imagine that poor employee looking down the toilet bowl and having an eyeball look back. That's essentially what happened too. When the plumber noticed the blockage, human remains, and immediately called the police, putting an end to Dennis Nilsen's murder spree. Hotel Hell was also called the H.H. Holmes Hotel, and it was literally built with the single goal of killing folks for sport. My American Horror Story fans may know, but this legendary building is the inspiration for their season Hotel, alongside the Cecil, of course. While it remains unknown how many people Holmes killed in this house of horrors, he once boasted of killing 27. However, some estimates claim the actual number could have been as low as 9 or as high as 200. Like I said, there ain't much info. For his mansion, H.H. Holmes planned the first floor to contain an entire block of storefronts that he'd be able to rent out to the flood of new businesses opening in the city. The third floor would contain apartments for new residents looking to make it in the big windy city. Eerily, for some of those unsuspecting residents, they may have eventually become Holmes' victims. Those victims got to see the second floor, one that was allegedly full of asphyxiation chambers and mazes and hidden stairs. There were hinged walls and false partitions. Some rooms had 5 doors and others had none. Secret airless chambers were found underneath floorboards, and iron plate lined walls appeared to stifle all sound. The first clue about this bizarre floor plan's true purpose came to the cops in a pile of bones, and when the authorities descended into the cellar, the scope of the building's hidden horrors were revealed. Beside a blood-soaked operating table, they found women's clothes, surgical surfaces, a crematorium, and an array of medical tools and bizarre devices. For the most part, Holmes represented himself at his trial, displaying his classic grace and a remarkable familiarity with the law, according to one paper at the time. However, his charm wasn't enough for the jurors, and he unanimously was sentenced to death.
Number 5. Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time. Ted Bundy killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree back in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known and they're horrible, but there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of a student, Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about these dark matters just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between work friends. Like it's not him describing the most horrible acts ever committed.
She had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer, there's a movie with Zac Efron. Choose your fate. Either way, the story that you're going to hear is chilling, so you've been warned. Number 4, The Staircase. The Staircase is a classic true crime staple, one of the most widely debated cases ever, as a matter of fact. Back in 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation, a few theories surrounding the case and the trial, but Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and it's horrible, it's sad, it's tragic. And while it was originally regarded as fatal, but an accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets a little more murky. Kathleen's husband, Michael, had always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list onto what happened here, considering that 1, he was the last one to see her alive, and 2, was actually home and supposedly in the backyard when this fall occurred. So yeah, definitely a suspect, for sure. We're gonna ask some questions. There's crazy theories surrounding this death. There's theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl. There's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is one you want to watch if you're a true crime lover. You're not really sure what to think afterwards, so comment down below. It's like this is chilling. This is a really chilling case. Number 3, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is known as the Night Stalker, with of course a documentary under the same name. All these horrible people have documentaries. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in the 1980s. He was known for invading homes, which actually initially made him dubbed as the walk-in killer. But he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the Satanic Panic. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Imagine walking in on that, that's terrifying. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of the crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his own kind of monster. It's said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. And during his court appearances, he would also hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So, yeah, quite horrible, I'd say. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Okay, this is a 2-for-1, so buckle up. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped, then they later killed 10 victims. It really was the most twisted situation. Disgusting, awful people. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to and receives 16 years. Gerald was waiting for execution, but he actually died of cancer before meeting that demise. So, yeah, I guess nature helped out with that one. Charlene, on the other hand, she got out. She actually moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. You can sleep on that. Could be living on your street, who knows. And finally, number 1, don't f with cats. Okay, when I say this is one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I mean it, okay? I was late to the party for this one. I watched it way long after it was released, but from the moment I started it, I could not stop. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn Junn, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. I wanted to end on it because, of course, I'm a Canadian. I saw this on the news when I was in school. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz because he was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. As the name hinted towards, he was with cats. That's all I can say. It's horrible. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos with the cats and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. They knew it was going to get worse, so they tried to track him down and, I'm not going to spoil the rest, but yeah, it's unbelievable. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible. The story is almost unbelievable also, but the work that these I already said that, whatever. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It really is hard to watch because of how tragic it is and the situations are dark, but again, the ending is worth it. It's definitely worth the watch, especially if you don't know the full story. They get them. Spoilers, they get them. Kicking off the list at number 10, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire or the Moon Maniac. So that's great. Or the Boogeyman himself. Those are the 3 nicknames that he goes by. That's absolutely horrible. It's pretty clear that Albert was a terrible human being who did terrible things that I can't really say. But as his nickname hints towards, he did some horrible things, right? Obviously. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and doing other things with his teeth to 3 people, but the horror was not over yet. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, that number was really closer to 100. And he even claimed that a lot of these victims came from every state. That's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already horrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He detailed everything about how he lured her and the rest of these horrific things that occurred afterwards, things that I can't say on this, YouTube box. This is one of those people that I'm not, sad at all they don't exist anymore. This is, I'm all about like rehab and treating people, but I'm like, just don't exist. How about that? You just stop eating people. Number 9, Robert Pickton. This horrible person is one of the worst Canadians to ever live and is one of our country's worst serial killers of all time. Pickton dropped out of school and began working at his family's pig farm, and this is where most of his absolutely horrific crimes took place, at this farm. He was first arrested in 2002 and was convicted in 2007 of taking the lives of 6 people, but throughout an extremely lengthy investigation, evidence of many more killings came to light. It's always more than we think, which is horrible. During his time in jail, an undercover police officer posed as his cellmate, and Pickton confessed to 49 crimes to him. 49. Apparently he was saying to this undercover officer that he wanted to take one more life to make it an even 50, and that he only got caught because he was sloppy. It makes me sick saying that out loud. It's disgusting. The entire trial was a bit of a mess, but it led to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which was the longest possible sentence under Canadian law at the time. This unfortunately does mean that he will be eligible for parole within the next decade. So, yep, let's move on with the list. Number 8, Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story is, again, obviously horrific. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade, he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. How do these people exist? I'm just not realizing that there's definitely an episode of Criminal Minds about this guy. There probably is, right? Sometimes the premise is so dark that it just sticks with you forever. This is one of those. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrific crimes, he was a soft-spoken baker. Yeah, he was a baker, like I said. One of my friends is a baker. I'm gonna message him. I'm gonna ask so many questions now. Robert was heading to church by day and then prowling gentlemen's clubs at night looking for the next victim. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was this badass named Cindy Paulson, who changed history, okay? She was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She made sure of that. Then she went to authorities and told them what exactly happened, and this of course led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all of said evidence was waiting. And then Robert was obviously found guilty. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So yeah, unless you got some Tuck Everlasting water, you're gone, pal. Number 7, Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who on April 30th, 2007 was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area. And on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. So again, it's more than we think. He's been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history. And if you know anything about LA history, you'll know that's pretty f***ed up to hear. In his original trial that led to conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one, in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. Nice, just an extra one just for fun. Just throw in a couple more. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of cases, in the end, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. So, A1 for science. We locked them up, we found out. Number 6, Jeffrey Dahmer. Of course, we have to throw in Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most well-known serial killers with his crimes taking place from 1978 to 1991. Your parents probably remember a lot of this. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel or this website, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people, I'll say that. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he himself was the devil, which was intended to, bolster his insanity plea and help him out. Again, that devil made me do it type of bullshit. His attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, and caught up in the character in the movie The Exorcist 3. Said character was Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. That'd be ironic, huh? Number 5, Google. The search engine that got me through school, jobs, adulthood, everything really, you name it. First of all, I remember when Google was new or newer. Like I would sit for hours as a kid and just Google photos of boats or buildings, just things that exist in the world because I could. It was fun. Things on the internet, that was exciting enough, but apparently not for Google. The tech giant was hit with a $4.3 billion fine by EU regulators for breaking antitrust laws. Yeah, antitrust, the same company that autofills all your shit every time you try and sign in. Remember that one. Also hit thumbs up, or else.
Number 4, Siemens. A household name. Not even sure how to say it correctly. We know this company. Industry, healthcare, and energy. It's one of those companies that puts money into a ton of stuff like cyber this and cyber that. It's most known for tech stuff, software, and billion-dollar bribes. That's right. German engineering giant Siemens AG has been fined $800 million by US authorities and an additional $395 million by German authorities. The company recently pleaded guilty to the corruption charges bribing foreign officials that violates a law called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Between 2002 and 2017, the companies acted as a cartel to illegally share out contracts valued at around $4 billion. The company is alleged to have bribed officials approximately 4,000 times between 2000 and 2006, with the goal of winning contracts abroad as an alpha supplier. Okay, so a little mob stuff, huh? I like it. A little suitcase full of money kind of thing. And that's exactly what happened. Hidden bank accounts, obscure intermediaries, and pseudo consultants. That's a mouthful. FBI caught on, of course, in 2008, but it wasn't until 2021 that the investigation unfolded and fines were issued. In total, about $1.6 billion for foreign bribery charges. Wow, that's a lot of money.
Number 3, Bank of America. Following the financial crisis of 2008, banks were held under a new light. This was a black light, right? Ready to see all the yuck going on behind that dirty counter. Let's What's going on over there? What is that? Show me that. Any sketchy detailings will now be abundantly clear. Let's avoid further financial situation. We can't be putting out subprime loans to sketchy clients anymore. We need people who are going to pay us back. Kind of helps. Then cut to 2013, the company was caught for selling toxic mortgages to investors. Yeah, that's a no-no. They were a big part of the financial crisis, so this time the Bank of America got a fine. This time they got fined $16.65 billion. That's like 2 games of Monopoly put together, all the cash if you add them up. That's a lot of cash.
Number 2, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company. Okay, so now we're talking big money. Big whoopsie daisies. 4 former TEPCO executives have been ordered by court to pay $80 billion over the 2011 Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster. In March 2011, a large undersea earthquake off the coast of Japan triggered a massive tsunami. When the huge waves flooded the generators, the cooling systems failed, causing the reactors to melt. The Fukushima meltdown was considered the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986 and prompted the declaration of a 30-kilometer evacuation zone around the Japanese plant. TEPCO is currently engaged in a decades-long effort to decommission the plant, which will take years to clear. The devastation alone caused the deaths of 18,000 people and wiped out entire towns off the map. Yeah, that's gonna cost you. Also, how are these 4 dudes gonna come up with 80 billion? It's like 20 billion each. Hey, if you're gonna ignore the massive tsunami warnings from scientists, you're gonna have to clean it up, dude. Also, a huge nuclear power plant close to an underwater volcano? Explain that one to me.
And finally, number 1, Pfizer. When we think of the name Pfizer, there's now obviously mixed feelings. Pun intended. But back in 2009, before they were making cures, they were paying hefty fines. The world's largest pharmaceutical company had to pay a record-breaking fine. They had to pay $2.3 billion in criminal and civil penalties over unlawful prescription drug promotions. Yeah, you can't be doing that stuff. Included in this mighty slap on the wrist was a $1.2 billion criminal fine. And the agreement was also a criminal forfeiture of $105 million. This was the 4th time Pfizer got charged with this magnitude in a decade. They were on a bad streak, dare I say. They promoted their products at resorts. They would invite doctors in to these meetings and then give them golf or massages. They would pepper you up, right? So you were then Team Pfizer, right? You were on board. FBI Assistant Director Kevin Perkins says the corporate giant was blatantly violating the law and misleading the public through false marketing claims, i.e. golf. See, it's always golf. That's why they're swearing. They're making cures over there for that left swing. Kicking off our list at number 10. Vending machine killer. Okay, right off the hop, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like it's something around 1 for every 23 people. So yeah, that's a lot of snacks. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. Now, when the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this entire ordeal, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from, you guessed it, a vending machine. One of the many vending machines in Japan. So when people didn't want their free drink, they would just leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful instead of throwing it in the garbage. But on the other hand, there's some people who are not nice or thoughtful and rather horrible. And it turns out someone was taking these drinks and lacing them with poison and then leaving them back on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or pass away. Like those numbers that I mentioned earlier. It's almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because, well, you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and that's pretty impossible seeing as in 1985 there weren't nearly as many CCTV cameras as there are today, or vending machines apparently for that matter. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. Number 9, Jacek Jaworek. Now, this is a man who was on the run because of horrible crimes that he committed in July of last year, so a little more recent than the 80s. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. But since these horrific crimes took place, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now, it's speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts still remain quite the mystery. He could be literally anywhere, which is terrifying. Number 8, John Pyle. This human is a pile of garbage. This horrible human is not an undercover spy or an insane fraudster. He's just a monster who committed certain specific crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't really talk about them here in this video because let's just say they're that brutal. But let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kind of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to these crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence that they found during said search, he was charged with 30 different second-degree felonies alone off just that one search, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. Now, he was arrested the same day, but he posted a bail bond of $90,000 as well as surrendering his passport. Now, fast forward 16 months, October 23rd, 2017, and of course this guy does not show up for his hearing. And thus we have a fugitive now on the run. Number 7. The Beer Man. He took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's not a lot of time at all. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man, such an odd nickname, is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Now, of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person has yet to have been caught, obviously. But it's been a while, so maybe they're naturally gone. You know what I'm saying? Number 6, the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those horrible, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, these crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years, it's said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. These women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were all from different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities between each of them, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same horrible person. Despite the years that it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. Number 5, banana theft. Banana thief. Theft? I don't know. Turns out bananas curse people, makes them do crazy things. This next couple is pretty odd. Here we go. Back in 2014, a Connecticut burglar drove his station wagon through the doors of a closed convenience store. He drove literally into a gas station, got out, stole a single banana, they peeled and then ate the fruit, and then fled the scene. That's right, nothing else was taken, no cash. I mean, there's obviously significant damage that has to be taken care of now, but the banana, the lone single banana, why? This isn't Mario Kart. You can't just throw a peel down and then make a getaway. You're gonna get caught. It's 2022, my guy. Keep your banana safe, folks. These people are sick. For example,
Number 4, fruit fight. Florida resident Philip Joseph Smolsky was charged with assault and battery on his girlfriend for apparently using a banana to throw at her. Police were called on the morning of January 3rd, 2014, and Pasco County deputy noticed a red mark on the victim's head where she said she had been hit by a flying fruit. That's like the start of a Cops episode, you know? Just driving. 42 David, we're actually responding now to a banana in pajamas over on Affidavit Avenue. The arrest affidavit shows that the same deputy also found a banana in a nearby garbage can, and that parts of the peel were found on the ground near where the girlfriend was sitting. A clue. In addition to the domestic battery charges, he was also charged with attempting to resist arrest without violence. How do you resist arrest without violence? Just say no, like no thank you, politely a couple times? No, I'm okay, thank you. Police say that pepper spray then was used to apprehend Smolsky. Ouch. This is just like the origins of a villain story. Oh no, it's Mr. Potassium Man. He's like throwing banana peels. Don't slip. Whip.
Number 3, tattoos tell all. Sometimes you get a tattoo to remember a person, or a place, or a time. Sometimes you get a tattoo of a mountain on your forearm because you like nature and being outside and that one trip that one time. Great, we get it, we love it. Every tattoo is meaningful in some way, sure. Well, thanks to those fond memories being drawn in ink, it was quite easy for California police to find the killer of a victim who had died 4 years prior. This killer, Anthony Garcia, decided to remember this horrible act after doing it by getting a tattoo of all the grim details right there on his chest. Yeah, police noticed the chest tats when taking Garcia's mugshot for another crime, much smaller than, murder, and that's where the tattoo stuck out to the police. They're like, wait a minute, we've been here before. The Christmas lights, the bent street lamp near the liquor store, this was the exact scene where the body was found 4 years prior. There was even a helicopter that looked angry depicting Garcia's nickname, Chopper. Yeah, I have a dragonfly for my mom. Yeah, I don't like needles, it's probably the only one.
Number 2, reverse Santa. The old reverse Santa, huh? the old chimney sweep. Apparently this is way more common than I thought. A Maryland man who was asked to remain anonymous, due to the ongoing case of course, is facing charges in court recently as the police had to respond to 2 calls from the same house. The family apparently heard scuffling and coughing in the middle of the night from behind their fireplace wall, and decided to reach out to authorities. But they were already beat to the chase by the man stuck in their wall. Yeah, I'd stay anonymous too. That's embarrassing. Guys just whispering directions to your house. Yeah, it's Bradshaw? Brad Bradshaw? Bravo? Romeo? Guy had to rat on himself. The fire department showed up, had to rip the wall down brick by brick to get Buddy out. Like, you wasted everyone's time, man. The family's time, the first responders' time, your getaway driver's time. And these guys' mugshots, they're the best. They're always just covered in soot, like a bad Oliver production. I'd do anything!
And finally, number 1. Use current location. Gotta save the most bizarre for last, I guess. Kristen DaCosta from Massachusetts. She's clearly never seen the movie Disturbia. She's sleeping on it. She's sleeping on Shia LaBeouf. Kristen was court-ordered to wear an ankle bracelet as part of her probation, but she luckily didn't know that the bracelet could track your whereabouts. Yeah, what did she think it was doing this whole time? She's like, okay, thanks. That's random. And then just committed crimes? This is why you have to watch Disturbia. Stop sleeping on Shia. Kristen had no clue that it was tracking her while she committed 17 break-ins. Yeah, homes all over southern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Bedford, Fairhaven. I mean, where does she get the energy, you know? Where does she find all that energy? So random. She didn't destroy anything at all. She just stole jewelry and then left. The police just watched her go spot to spot, tracking her down. Just ping, ping, ping. Awesome. There she is now. Great. One owner didn't even realize they'd been robbed. That's how fast Kristen was. So, you know, if only she didn't have that ankle monitor on the entire time, she would have maybe got away with one of the 17 that she tried. I can't hop one fence, let alone 17. That's insane. I'm kind of impressed. Don't do crimes, but that's a little impressive. Number 10, George Chapman. Starting off with George Chapman, we're going back to the late 1800s for this piece of work right here. He began his career at first as a Polish doctor, but in 1888 he moved to London, and that's when things got a little more dicey. Once in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, not a side thing, not 4. Let's do 4 at the same time. George Chapman was a doctor, a cheater, and a killer. He poisoned all 4 of these women with arsenic. It was terrible. Chapman himself was executed for these crimes in 1903, but we're still talking about them because this guy was so bad, they thought perhaps he might have been Jack the Ripper, but that's since been proven otherwise, so yeah. Imagine someone being so bad, they're like, maybe he was Jack the Ripper, maybe he was just another horrible individual, who knows. Number 9, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston. Okay, this was the famous Devil Made Me Do It case. If you've watched the new Conjuring sequel with the same title, this should all ring a familiar bell. Well, it's based of course on a true story, all that's real. Back in 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arnie was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and the victim was his landlord, Alan Bono. Now, prior to this, about 2 months prior, the Glatzel family witnessed their son David host a demon. Right? David was behaving strangely, the family was confident this was the work from the devil, so they called in the pros. They called in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now this was a process that lasted days, and witnesses say that the demon that fled out of the body of David was the same that took over Arnie a few months later. The same demon that made him attack his landlord. Yeah, Arnie was convicted and he served 5 years out of a 10 to 20 year sentence. Yeah, he was released on good behavior. Number 8, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or even the Boogeyman himself. It's clear that Albert was a terrible human who did terrible things. I can't really talk about some of the stuff, but yeah, given those nicknames, you can piece it together. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing, and then doing other things with these people. Horrible. But the horror was not over at that point. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the actual number of casualties was closer to 100. And he even claimed that he had some in every state. So that's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He sent a letter detailing everything about how he lured the victim and the rest of the horrific details that occurred afterwards. Number 7, Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, Jeffrey's one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place, of course, from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney his attorney had some interesting words for the court, some interesting things to say. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. Odd take, but sure. Again, the devil made me do it type of bullshit. Now, his attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say caught up in the character from the movie Exorcist 3. Said character being Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. Number 6. Richard Iceman Kuklinski. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City, okay? He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, that's still a lot, but he had claimed that the actual number was close to 250, so yeah. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of this list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in the first place. While he killed his victims in a multitude of horrible ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, right, and really figure out who was doing it. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know the time of death for that one. We know that one very well. The Iceman, check it out, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary.
Number 5, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Does this really need an introduction? That's all anybody's talking about right now. But Johnny Depp, one of America's greatest actors and teenage heartthrob on 21 Jump Street. Am I right, ladies? God, he was cute in that. Amber Heard being some lady who had a breakout role as a fish lady in Aquaman. I haven't seen Aquaman, that's just what it looks like to me. And all of this in one of the messiest divorces ever publicized. Yikes. This trial is happening as I speak. Probably right now. It's happening right now. And we are slowly reaching the outcome. However, all I'll say is when 2 gorgeous millionaires marry each other and you mix in some illicit substances, well, are we really surprised this didn't work out? Johnny Depp we're talking about here. If I ever get rich and famous, I will never treat my loved ones like that, or any of the amazing people that follow me. I love you guys. You're the best. Thanks so much for watching all the time, guys. I love you. And checking me out on my own socials. Oh, shucks. You guys are the best. Number 4, French royalty. Imagine being so down bad with your husband that it starts a revolution and then inspires other European nations to be free from monarchical tyranny. Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI were the last kings and queens of France. If crimes against humanity don't count, then I don't know what does. People had no rights, even less rights than truckers in Ottawa. Oh, that's the worst. It was a very interesting time in history. By the end, the Castile had been sieged, heads were on pikes, and the national razor was brought out just to show how democratic a new government can be. Next time, be sure to share food at the bread table. That's all I gotta say about that. Number 3, Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Talk about scandal. Oh, if we had social media back then, this would have been everywhere. A regular Romeo and Juliet. And a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde too, actually. Cleopatra had a few Roman men wrapped around her finger. It was politics, and she was playing the long game. The star-vexed lovers were playing with 2 empires, some of the largest at the time. However, their political string pulling and bedsheet wrestling would come to a tragic end. Cleopatra and Mark Antony would never be around to see their empires fall after some betrayal, and both of them having their lives taken away. They did some naughty things in between that though, they weren't very nice. Number 2, Mustache Man and Blonde Lady. Hey, even the biggest, baddest guys in history get lonely. Ava Braun, Mustache Man's main squeeze and wife right up until the Red Army came a-knockin'. Oh boy, they came a-knockin'. We all know what he's guilty of, and honestly, I think she's kind of guilty too. We've all seen the lost German footage of the boys making plans at the Eagle's Nest, and there she is. I'd say that doesn't look too good. I'm not a lawyer, or I am, but it doesn't look too good. It's kind of like if Adam and I were on an episode of Cops, and we got pulled over in a car together. The footage made it to the show, which means there's something in the car. It all depends on who wants to take the blame. Otherwise, you're guilty by association, or an accessory to the fact. So, yeah, I think she is kind of guilty too. Yep. If you weren't guilty, you would have gone down in the bunker with him. You know what I'm saying, Chris? You know what I'm saying? Number 1, Mussolini and partners, because he had more than one. A lot of people think Mustache Man did it on his own, but the truth is he had a lot of help from his fascismo friend in Italy, Mussolini. From organizing his fascist beatdown gangs to the brown shirts and all the war crimes in between, Mussolini had a hand in it. He showed him the way. Mussolini not only did all this while married, but kept the company of unsavory mistresses. It's a good thing he controlled the media because people wanted to say some bad things about him and his most favorite mistress, Claretta. His wife Rachel stayed with him up until the end when him and Claretta were brutally unalived by citizens fed up with his chin, he had a chin thing, and his machismo government. Multiple crimes against humanity and cheated on his wife. You know, we know you knew better. Come on, let's be honest. That's gonna wrap it up for me today, guys. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe here at Bumblebee. I love you so much. And if you too wanna not be bad guy, good guy like me sometimes, then check out my socials somewhere down below.
Coming in at number 10, Corey Delaney. I thought I'd start this list off nice and easy and more on the cheaper side of things. This one is fun. We all remember this movie. Project X, the comedy from 2012 about a young man who decides to throw the biggest, raddest kegger ever at his parents' house and ends up getting in a ton of trouble. Yeah, fun fact, also the most illegally torrented movie of 2012. I don't know, just a fun fact for you. And yes, based on a very true story. Delaney, now Worthington, of Melbourne, Australia, decided in 2008 that he would throw a small yet quaint shindig with a couple of his buddies. Couple chips, couple dips. Actually, it was more like, quote, "Parents away, tell your mates. You don't want to miss this, it's going to be huge." Written on MSN, publicly. Well, this online invite turned into about 600 raging teenagers showing up to one house. If you've seen the movie, that's pretty well it. Basically looked like The Purge, but like 4 locos on the lawn everywhere. Crashed and broken cars, broken into homes. The street an absolute nightmare. But a school legend. Small fine though for mom and dad, only about $20,000 in damages. Not a bad fine. More of a fun little slap on the wrist if you ask me. Hey, drywall holes and a new roof are gonna cost ya. If we threw a rager back in high school, what do you think mom and dad would do? Like they'd publicly skin us like a medieval cat.
I would never see my phone again. I'd be grounded for life. Number 9, Tiger Woods. Yeah, before we head down to the oil spills and cover-ups and all that jazz, we gotta have some fun, right? 14-time champion Tiger Woods. He's been in many spotlights over the many years, but we'll keep this in this lane for now, you know? Lane. He's good. Back in 2011, after the Masters, a viewer from Texas wrote to the FCC to complain that one Tiger Woods had been cursing and using a profane 4-letter word on live television. How dare he? I wonder why. Then later on during the second round coverage, another viewer wrote in and they say, "On Good Friday, while my husband was watching the Masters golf tournament, all of a sudden the living room was now filled with a person swearing, using the Lord's name in vain, and damning during golf." How unacceptable is that? When watching a sports program, we should be free from vile, insulting assaults like this one issued by Tiger Woods when he was unhappy with his golf drive. Yeah, good thing this household doesn't watch rugby. I don't know, imagine that. Yeah, I can't imagine what's frustrating about messing up a 400-yard drive in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah, what compels a person to swear in a moment like that? Oh, I wonder, can't imagine. Every time my finger touches a hot pan, it just comes out, you can't help it. I swear at mini golfing, I'll be at a mini golfing thing 14 feet away from a birthday party. They're hiding behind like a glow-in-the-dark whale and I'm like, okay.
Number 8, JP Morgan Chase. We've heard about this name in every movie that involves a suit. Guys in a suit? JP Morgan is a line somewhere in that movie. Basically, this company in 1877 started as a bank and then funded some construction stuff and then bought some more banks, then paid for some public stuff. Hey, Brooklyn's Bridge, nice. And some more online banking stuff till we finally know it as one of the largest financial industries on earth. JP Morgan Chase literally has a hand in everything in everyone's pocket. Where do I tap? Just right here. And that's done? Wow. And in 2021 was slapped with a huge fine for over 300 years worth of info publicly being traded and leaked. Uh-oh. 2 separate banking regulators have charged JP Morgan Chase over $200 million for leaking crucial security data on their work communication platform, WhatsApp. Yeah, WhatsApp. You know the worldwide conversation maker? All you need is a number and an area code. Well, apparently employees have been using this platform as their main source of communication since early 2015, and it seems that it breaches a couple of their security protocols. I get random people asking me all the time if this is Bridget or Trisha. Imagine 300 years worth of secure data, trillions of dollars at stake, and they're asking Tom where he's getting lunch today. Couldn't you just email each other at the office? You know, someone was just sitting there for hours on end scrolling through 1777 documents in WhatsApp trying to find out where there's buried treasure. Keywords. Keywords.
Number 7, Rory McIlroy. Okay, I had to include another golf one because it's so funny to me. It's funny to me that the sport that requires the most patience and stillness around every player, there's literally a guy that walks around with a shush board, like it's a live sitcom from the 90s. It's respected. Even the way you clap during golf, that's not a hockey clap, it's a classy clap. It's a golf clap, you know? It has like a little weird thing to it. So when people like Rory McIlroy toss a club after said peaceful sport moment, it's jarring, right? It's gonna shock you. The USGA takes professionalism very seriously, and back in 2015, in the second round of the World Championships, on the 8th hole, Rory McIlroy hits his ball right into the water on a par 5, and in a fit of rage, he tosses his club into the pond as well, which is wild. Moments earlier, both the ball and the club were on land. Now they're both sunken treasure. All because of this man, Rory. This isn't golf-like, this isn't professional. God knows he probably swore too. So in turn, Rory was fined $25,000. And after a quick apology, that fine dropped down to $5,000. Yeah, all because he said sorry.
Number 6, Volkswagen. Next up, emissions. Das Auto. Volkswagen has been issued a couple fines in the last 15 years. Hey, great cars, but a couple of issues here. Apparently, Volkswagen has been under investigation by the automotive industry and the European Commission since around 2009 for violating harmful emissions qualifications and even selling defective cars to other countries, in which Canada charged Volkswagen about $200 million in a lawsuit over unsafe manufacturing, $450 million in a cartel dispute surrounding the unsafe regulation of outdated nitrogen oxide technology, named as the main player in the Dieselgate scandal. The Dieselgate scandal, like the Watergate scandal. I don't get the reference, I'm way too young. Basically, they got caught using cheap and faulty software that doesn't meet safe to use emission standards and had to fess up. Lying, cheating, and covering it up, huh? Just driving and coughing non-stop, 13 puffers and car payments for a Mini Cooper, who'd have thought? Perfect. To date, Volkswagen has been issued around $1 billion in legal fines. Yikes.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Lavina Fisher. You may have heard Lavina's name before, and that is because she made American history when she became the first female serial killer in the United States. Wow, what a title. Sure, her parents were proud. Lavina, along with her husband John, were accused of luring travelers into their inn in Charleston, South Carolina during the 19th century and then killing them so that they could take their belongings. The couple were known for their hospitality, and many unsuspecting travelers fell victim to their deadly scheme as a result. Some stories even suggest that they had a trap door in one of the guest rooms that led to a pit where they would dump all of the bodies of their victims. Despite the numerous accusations and suspicions surrounding the Fishers, they were never formally charged with the killing. However, they were eventually caught and convicted for highway robbery and sentenced to hang. In our number 4 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's crimes were some of the worst, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today, because after the first 2 of his crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason, they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989, and thankfully he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called this early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Hwaesong serial killer. This is the name used to describe a notorious unsolved criminal case that occurred in South Korea during the late 1980s. The killer was responsible for taking the lives of at least 10 women in the city of Hwaesong between 1986 and 1991. The victims were all found, but there was little to no evidence left at the crime scenes. The case was highly publicized and became one of the most infamous serial killer cases in South Korean history. Despite a massive investigation and the arrest of several suspects, including a man who confessed to the the crimes, DNA evidence ultimately exonerated all of them. The case remains unsolved to this day, with many theories and speculations surrounding the identity of the killer. The Hwaesong serial killer case sparked significant changes in the way South Korea approaches criminal investigations though, including the establishment of a national DNA database and the implementation of more advanced forensic techniques. In our number 2 spot today we have Franklin Dwayne Alex. Franklin is a man who had quite an insane crime spree that lasted for about 6 months in the 1990s. Although short, it was anything but sweet. The spree started off in August of 1997 in Houston, Texas, and over the course of this spree, Franklin took the lives of at least 3 people. He committed robberies, he harmed people, he attempted to take more lives where thankfully the people survived, he kidnapped people. Literally any serious crime he could commit during those 6 months, he was doing it. In the end, Franklin was caught and put on trial for his crime spree, and he received a sentence of death, which was carried out on March 30th, 2010. Finally, in our number 1 spot today we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These two were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about completely random violence that absolutely terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. The charges included the killings and attempted killings he had done, arson, animal cruelty, and the drive-bys. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Dale sat on death row, he apparently asked to be put to death as soon as possible, and in the end, in 2013, he decided to take his own life. Samuel, however, remains in prison.
Number 10. Man eats underwear to avoid breathalyzer. In Alberta, Canada, there was a man in 1985 by the name of David Zerfleur. He was pulled over by RCMP officer for weaving on a snowy road after apparently drinking one night. He then decided to run from police after being pulled over on foot. It's literally every cop's dream. They're just sitting there, please run, please run, yes! Of course they caught him and booked him for what intended on being an impaired driving charge. Whilst in the back of the cruiser, of course, David ripped the crotch out of his underwear to eat it. Couple things here. How do you even get that down? I can't swallow a Tylenol without choking. Apparently he didn't eat it. He spat it out after a while and was just kind of chewing on it. His theory was that the cotton might absorb the alcohol content before he got to the station to do a proper test. Which, when he got there, he was acquitted of all charges and blew a legal, respectful .8. He did it. I mean, first off, dick move for driving though, that's not cool. Very dangerous and very selfish. Best part comes weeks later at his hearing. Just so happened a group of grade 11 and 12 law students watching the hearing as a class, just, you know, teenagers giggling the entire time. Of course they were teenagers. Order, order! Did you stuff your own tidy whities into your mouth? Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness.
Number 9. Spider hostage. Look, I don't like spiders. This next guy on our list doesn't even respect spiders, okay? Paul Brian Smith, the man who has 3 first names. Back in 2012, Paul agreed to watch a friend's pet spider, which on paper at first I'm like, hey, gross, but I get it, that's awesome. A little bit of Home Alone vibes going on there. When the friend came to collect said furry friend, Paul held the spider ransom. Said if he didn't get $100, he'd swat the spider. He'd swat the spider. Sounds like a Spider-Man villain there. Like J. Jonah Jameson. Gonna swat the spider. In turn, Paul received 40 months in prison for burglary, theft, possession of drug paraphernalia, and more. Yeah, there may or may not have also been a person hiding in the closet when cops came around. This one's really bizarre. Can't really talk about the weird, awful extra details on this case. Paul Brian Smith, give it a lookie once you're done here. Also, save the spiders, they're good.
Number 8. A bath salts Christmas. An Ohio Christmas miracle. Sounds like a Christian rock group. A man by the name of Terry Trent was charged with breaking and entering a home at Christmas when he was arrested very high on little more than just Christmas spirit. The family arrived home and saw the man sitting on their couch watching some Christmas shows. While Dad's on the phone with police, the man apologized, thanked them for his stay, and calmly left. Family said that the man apologized after lighting a candle, fixing up their wreath, relaxing on the couch, and finishing up the last Christmas tree decorations. Ah, the spirit of Christmas. The guy's the opposite to the Grinch. Dude, this guy's the real Santa Claus. I hope you're all good. He's coming in to do his check-ins. Police arrived and said Terry didn't cause any problems, went in with them calmly and quietly. See, guy just needed some Christmas company. Wanted to catch Mr. Bean's Christmas special. Who wouldn't? That could have been really, really bad and turned out to be a zombie apocalypse Christmas dinner, but thankfully it did not. Also, it's Christmas. I've seen my aunts after some wine. It's pretty well the same thing, isn't it?
Number 7. Photobomb. I love a good photobomb. I dug this one out of the archives. This is from 6 years ago at a bar. I'm a big fan of rooting a beautiful moment between two other friends. Friends? These are my friends. Sometimes photos catch great moments. Sometimes they catch not so smooth criminals as well. Back in October 2010, a Wisconsin man got caught trying to steal a tourist bag. This guy was caught in 4K. While he was stealing the bag, the owners of said bag were taking a selfie a few meters away. He's in the background taking the bag, just clear as day. It's so funny. He immediately was sentenced to 5 days in jail, obviously. The 69-year-old man's name is Glenn Lambright. Pretty ironic last name, seeing how easily he was caught. Mr. Lambright was also fined $500. Guy just gets caught in a boomerang.
Number 6. Dances with lions. 32-year-old Maya Autry of Bronx, New York was caught on camera at the Bronx Zoo apparently taunting and dancing in a lion's exhibit with a lion. She apparently calls herself the Lion Queen, and she has been seen on camera not once, but twice, dangerously close to these cats inside the lion's exhibit. She's lucky that this thing is tranked out of its mind, just chillin', bored. People will do anything nowadays for the gram. She's throws some cash, threw a dozen red roses, and danced for the lion. You know, dinner and a show. The lion has been praying for a day where someone gets this bold. Apparently she gotten herself into the exhibit before and was handed a citation prior and a year ban before returning again. 2 counts of criminal trespassing. The video is great too. The lion's just sitting there. He's like, so you coming in or not? You just gonna stand there? Hey, you know the score of the Knicks game? No? Alright.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Stephen Griffiths. This is a person who is said to have idolized the Yorkshire Ripper, so I'm sure what comes next will be no surprise. Stephen was a PhD student who wanted to achieve fame, but through the most sinister way possible. Between June of 2009 and May of 2010, he would go on to take the lives of 3 separate women. His criminal history was also extremely concerning, as years ago, he had been arrested due to an unprovoked attack on a grocery store manager, and it is said that he previously stated that he saw himself becoming a serial killer. Shortly after he was arrested for his crimes, CCTV footage emerged that showed him celebrating after taking the life of his final victim. The footage showed him holding up a crossbow and giving the finger directly to the camera. It is said that Stephen pled guilty to his crimes once caught, not because he was remorseful, but because he wanted to receive the recognition for them. In our number 4 spot today, we have Joanna Denny. This is the person responsible for a series of killings and attacks that took place in March of 2013. Joanna is a very cold and very heartless person and has on many occasions been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her and they used CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things about this story that make it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she really is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it quite clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involved the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. In our number 3 spot today, we have Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Elizabeth is a former registered nurse and serial who is responsible for taking the lives of 8 and attempting to take the lives of another 6 senior citizens who were under her care. With a total of 14 victims that either passed away or were harmed by her actions, she is now one of the worst serial killers Canada has ever seen. And not to mention how she was doing these things to vulnerable people that she was supposed to have devoted her life to taking care of. Her first victim who passed away was James Silcox, who was 84 in 2007 and was a World War II veteran. She committed her crimes by injecting insulin into her patients. In September of 2016, Liz ended up entering herself into a drug rehabilitation program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is located here in Toronto. It was here that she ended up confessing to her horrific crimes. Of course, the staff at the hospital notified the proper authorities, and she was subsequently arrested, and she gave police a 2-hour confession. She admitted to knowing what she did was wrong, but she also just said that she had urges she couldn't control. She stated that, quote, God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison, but because of the way that the Canadian system works, she will at some point be eligible for parole, and hopefully denied, alright? In our number 2 spot today, we have Kevin Davis. The story behind this killer is truly one of the most disturbing things I have ever heard in my entire life. Kevin Davis was 18 years old when he took the life of his own mother. It seems as though there was some sort of conversation beforehand that had made him upset, which of course is never a good enough reason to do something like this, but there are details about this crime I wish that I could just unlearn. In an interview with police, he gives them an extremely detailed account of basically everything that happened and seems to show absolutely no remorse at all. It is chilling, it is disgusting, and it is honestly just horrific. During his trial, a doctor did testify to say that he had a personality disorder, but that he also fully knew the difference between right and wrong, and knew that his crime was wrong, and that there were no medical diagnosis that could justify his actions. Kevin is still in jail, where he will most likely spend the rest of his life, but he will become eligible for parole in 2044. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Axeman of New Orleans. Unfortunately, this is not the name of some terrible horror flick, and instead it's the moniker given to a terrible, unidentified serial killer. This person was active in New Orleans, Louisiana, and its surrounding areas from May of 1918 to October 1919. As the name implies, those who were targeted by this person were usually attacked with an axe, and it usually was one that actually belonged to the victims themselves. Many people believe that this person may have been targeting people of Italian descent because this was a theme among the victims, and some also believe that he was mainly targeting women and only took the lives of men when they tried to intervene. This is actually somewhat supported by the homes where women were killed but men weren't. In the end, although this person is responsible for taking at least 12 lives, exactly who the Axeman is or was.
Number 10. Cassie Chadwick. Also a Canadian. How could she? I'm upset right off the bat. Cassie went to the United States to pull this one off. If Canadians want any fame, they always go to the States. Even if it's fame for being a con artist. They're like, yeah, you gotta go south, bro. Gotta go to Hollywood, man. Just get out of here. I'm like, no. That's so stupid. She went to the States to convince everybody that she was the daughter of Andrew Carnegie. This was back in the early 1900s, so yeah, it worked. She convinced Cleveland banks to hand out $5 million in securities. Now keep in mind, that's a lot more than $5 million now, so sweet. Also, this was a time where women could not get bank loans in general, ever, so this was an impossible task times 2. Is it wrong of me to say I'm kind of impressed? Cassie passed away at age 50 in 1907 in the Columbus Penitentiary. Yeah, she got caught, but she got away with it for a bit, so, you know. Number 9. Donald Pugh. Okay, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Donald Pugh was suspected of arson and vandalism. So police in Ohio put a photo out of his face, of course, and they asked locals to step in and help get this man off the streets. Now this was back in 2016. Now the photo that was issued to the public was this one. But Donald wasn't a fan, right? So he sent the police a better photo of himself to use. Look, Donald, the shot, yeah, I admit it's much better. Facial hair is cleaned up a bit, the shades are pretty sick, that's a great addition. Gotta protect your eyesight as you commit arson, I guess. The police department got this pic, it's just, you know, a selfie, with the message, here is a better photo. That one is terrible. So they're like, okay, thank you. Shocker, he was caught immediately. Number 8, Logan James. Not to be confused with James Logan, that's Wolverine. No, Logan James over here had actually just breached his license conditions after being released from prison on February 6, 2015. Gwent police took to Facebook to ask locals to help out, but one user in the comments section started getting a lot of upvotes, a lot of likes. It's Logan James himself commenting on the Gwent police status. What does he have to say? Let's tune in. Haha, catch me if you can, won't see me slipping. Over 40 likes, obviously, is a pretty hot comment, right? He then added, I've been walking around near home, so they're not trying too hard to catch me, lol. Yeah, James was then caught hours later near said home, and the police thanked the public again for doing their part. Thanks, Logan. Again, we couldn't have done it without you. Number 7. Adrian Klein. Apparently we can't trust funeral directors now. That's fun. I guess sleep in fear. This was recent as well. This was back in 2011 when Aspen Mortuaries had a contract embalmer. First of all, that's a pretty wild job just to pick up and go around and do. Kudos if you do that. Just a contract embalmer out there. Hit that thumbs up. Nice. His name was Adrian Klein and the job was going well, I guess as well as it could be going in that specific job, until a local pawn shop delivered a tip to police saying that Klein was selling a lot of gold. A suspicious amount of gold. And considering his job, now we gotta ask a few questions, right? Was Adrian selling watches, rings, necklaces, anything like that? No, Adrian was actually selling gold teeth that he, himself. Between May and November of 2011, Klein had been selling dental gold to over 17 different pawn shops and making a pretty penny because of it. That's disgusting. Imagine the smell. Like, how do you even take that to the shop without them? Let's move on. I'm gonna throw up. Number 6, Charles Ponzi. Yeah, we've all heard the term Ponzi scheme at one point or another, but what does that even mean? Who is this man? What has he done? What has he done in history? I always get him confused with the Fonz. So growing up, I was like, this Fonz character is a little sketchy. I think. I don't know. I don't watch this show. I'm far too young. A Ponzi scheme. It's a sham of an operation. Back in 1903, Charles first moved to the United States. He was an Italian immigrant who was just looking for work. Simple as that. Now, after working job after job after job, he eventually got hired at Bank Zerosi in Montreal, Canada. When the bank went bankrupt, Ponzi was screwed. He needed to do something fast. So he dabbled into smuggling and then promptly was caught. Now, after he was released, he went into the postal system, right? This is his last hurrah. He started to buy large quantities of postal coupons from countries that already had a weak economy. He then hired a bunch of agents and trained them up good, like Wolf of Wall Street style, and the whole idea was that you would promise investors that they would receive double their investment in return within 45 days. Yeah, how lovely does that sound? Agents got 10% commission during this whole thing, so as far as the scheme, it's actually not bad.
This is the strangest thing on our countdown by a long shot, the horse. It's a rare kind of story that manages to walk that fine line between disturbing and hilarious. The Claw horse intercourse case was a series of incidents in 2005 involving Kenneth Pinion, James Michael Tate, and other unidentified men. So you may be wondering, hey Teresa, how does this actually even happen? Great question. So, it starts when Pinion loses his ability to experience certain sensation in the body after a motorcycle accident, and he began to seek out sexual extremism to fill that void. The internet's a deep and scary place, and on their Pinion finds a community of men called zoos who would meet up in farms for communal weekends of animal fun. They train the horses to participate even, and I'm not going to tell you how. Research this nightmare yourself. Pinion is killed on a farm northwest of Claw, according to Governor John Urquhart of the sheriff's office. He said that typically the men were horsing around with the same horse on the property of James Michael Tate, but on this particular night, it's my understanding the horse wasn't particularly receptive, so the men had to go elsewhere. Having snuck into a barn and gotten up to whatever they do, Pinion sustains internal injuries from this not usual horse and is dropped off naked from a speeding car in front of Claw Community Hospital on July 2nd of 2005, where he's declared deceased on site from colon perforation. Reported in the Seattle Times, it was one of the paper's most read stories of 2005. Pinion's death was rapidly prompted to enact the bill of Washington State Legislature that prohibits both intercourse with animals and the videotaping of such an act, with jail time and fines as penalties. Persecutors also later determined that the horses hadn't been injured. Meet the real-life Jigsaw toy box killer. David Ray Parker became known as the toy box killer following the chilling discovery of his sadistic chamber in 1999. Dude went full Jigsaw before any of the horror movies even happened. He soundproofed a truck trailer, which he called his toy box, where he'd tortured and assaulted victims, telling them exactly what he was going to do to them in explicit detail while they were restrained, and he even went as far as putting mirrors on the ceiling and walls because he wanted them to see what was happening. He didn't even kill all of his victims. Rather, when he was done with some of them, he would heavily dose them with an intensely powerful drug and then drop them somewhere. One of his victims actually didn't remember what happened at all and thought she was having horrific reoccurring nightmares until she finally put the pieces together and realized what had happened, and no one believed her. It's estimated he killed up to 60 victims in New Mexico. Many of the bodies were never recovered as they were and dumped in undisclosed locations. Parker also made recordings of his victims' demise and showed no remorse for his crimes, explaining, "It was a source of entertainment that made me create these tapes." His final intended victim luckily managed to escape with her life after 3 days of agony and report David to police. What can only be described as despicable, the hi-fi slayings. They still shock today, and honestly they could probably top this list and really any others when it comes to true evil human beings. In 1974, 3 men, Dale Selby, William Andrew, and Keith Roberts, entered Hi-Fi Shop in Ogden just before closing time, holding store workers 20-year-old Stanley Walker and 18-year-old Michelle Ansley hostage in the basement as they robbed the store. 16-year-old Byron Nasbitt enters the store with impeccably wrong timing as he was running errands and was also taken hostage. Both Byron's mother, Carolyn Peterson Nasbitt, and Stanley fathers Orrin Walker arrive at the store to look for their children who had yet to return for over an hour. Now they suffered the same captive fate. What happened is unimaginable and some of the most unnecessary human violence that has ever happened. The robbers forced the group to drink corrosive drain cleaner in an ill attempt to end their lives. All it does is cause them agony and screams. This is the breaking point for it falling apart, and the robbers panicked and really lost control. Their attempted methods of killing hostages became bizarre and more ineffective. They shot at them, they brought a pen into the mix and put it through someone's ear. They just ended up choosing to finish loading the van and leave. That's right, they just leave. There's no police outside forcing them to do all this. There's no need to kill these people other than panic. The 2 surviving victims sustained permanent life-changing injuries, and these twisted killers were executed by lethal injection. The otaku killer may genuinely not have had a soul. His one true companion was his grandfather, so when he died, it wasn't totally strange to his family that Miyazaki transformed. Just not to this extreme. They reported he'd begun spying on his little sisters, and then he attacked them when he was confronted about it. At one point he even attacked his mother for an argument they had. Miyazaki then admitted that he had eaten some of his grandfather's ashes after he'd been cremated in order to feel closer with him. In August of 1988, just one day after his 26th birthday, he abducts his first victim, Mary Kano. For several weeks the body decomposes, and then he checks in on it periodically. Eventually he removed parts of it to keep at home. He would also call her family and breathe deeply into the phone. Later he sent them a note and a box full of their daughter's bone dust. When the police announced this on the news, he sends them another taunting letter. His second victim is abducted in October of 1988 and again left the body in the woods while he took the victim's clothing with him. Within the next 8 months, the killer would escalate to 2 more, and they would go missing in the same manners. Otaku would drink their blood and sometimes dine on their remains. The otaku killer was finally apprehended when he was attempting his 5th kidnapping. The girl's older sister tells their father of a strange man, and the father goes and quite literally jumps Miyazaki to save his daughter. Mia gets away but idiotically returns to the park where his car was, and the police ambush him. Miyazaki, who retained a perpetually calm, collected demeanor throughout his trial, appeared indifferent to his capture. When asked about his crimes, he blamed them on the Rat Man, an alter ego that lived inside him and forced him to do terrible things. He was given death penalty in 2008. The uncaught offender of California. Once unnamed, Joseph James D'Angelo was found to be the face of the original Night Stalker, an uncaught serial offender for a long series of home invasions in Sacramento in 1976. He's actually responsible for at least 3 separate crime sprees throughout the state, each of which spawned different nicknames in the press before it became evident they were committed by one person. The Visalia Ransacker, Earons, the Night Stalker, followed by the original Night Stalker since Ramirez came along and snatched up that jazzy title. He frequently breaks into homes in the daytime prior to committing the attack and would do things like unload the household weapons, leave pieces of rope, remove screens from windows, cut phone lines. He'd also call the victims before and after their attacks. He was known for his taunting and threatening of both victims and police in obscene phone calls and written communications, and one of the more chilling instances is at a community meeting in Sacramento regarding the attacks. A man stands up and declares he would protect his wife if the attacker came into their home next. Lo and behold, that couple is victimized next. He was there and must have followed them home. In 1978, he begins attacking all throughout Northern California, and then in 79, he vanishes. In the late 1990s, DNA revealed he moved to Southern California and became a starting December of 79 there. He committed 10 murders and ranged from the Goleta to Dana Point region. On April 24th of 2018, the state of California charged the 72-year-old with 8 counts of first degree based upon DNA evidence. Investigators identified members of D'Angelo's family through forensic genealogy. D'Angelo couldn't be charged with his 1970s essays, but he was charged with the 2018 ones and 13 kidnappings and abduction attempts.
Number 10, Jack the Ripper. If we were to pick a poster boy for this list, well, it'd be him. Jack the Ripper was the alias given to the unknown criminal with sick tastes. During a period in the late 1800s, there was a string of cold-blooded de-lifings that affected London. Victorian London, to be specific. It got so bad that they were telling people not to go out at night in fear of the Ripper. Ooh, that does not sound good. His crimes were extremely graphic and violent and meant for a much more mature and suitable audience. Just to make things even worse, he was never caught or really even fully identified. Some of the theories say he was a she, he was multiple people, or even Prince Albert. They thought it was Prince Albert at one point. They really don't know. Oh, that's terrible. That's just awful. Right, I'll go out with you, but your Ripper could be out. Number 9, Charles Bravo. Mr. Bravo succumbed to his illness in 1876. He had been poisoned with antimony, which at first when I read that, I thought it said alimony, and I feel like a lot of husbands died of that. That's a divorce joke for everybody at home. With antimony, which is a poison that works very, very slowly. Slowly enough that he would have known what was happening. Thus, he quite possibly knew who did it, but never revealed who did. Now, at the time, it was believed to be a manual checkout, if you will. What's crazy about this case, though, is that it's like a game of Clue. The wife was having an affair with the doctor, so you know, there was something there. There was also a disgruntled maid who all wanted a piece of Mr. Bravo. Yes. The family fun game night conclusion was it was the wife in the library with the candlestick. I meant the poison. She poisoned him. It was her with the poison. We think. That's the running theory. We still don't know. Number 8, Thames Torso. The Thames River is famous for being a stinky, rotten, no good, very bad river filled with the most heinous refuse humans have to offer. That's right, love. It's awful, isn't it? Oh, it's bloody awful. So, to some, it shouldn't be a surprise that in September of 1873, a woman's torso was recovered from the river. Hold on to your barf bag, folks, because it's only going to get worse from here. There was also lungs, a right thigh, a right shoulder, and lastly, a scalp of the face, and it is attached. It is gross. Ooh, they found that as well. Authorities did their best to reconstruct the body, but this isn't a Malibu plastic surgery office. They even sat out the face on display in hopes the public could identify the victim. One man suspected it was his missing daughter, but a positive ID could not be made. Thus, we know nothing about the case. Number 7, the Gattons. In 1898, adult siblings Michael, Nora, and Ellen Murphy were on their way home Boxing Day after an entertaining day out. They made their way home after a dance had been canceled. And sometimes that happens, but they still made the best of it, and you know what? I respect that. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the afternoon. That's awesome. However, they never made it home. Their bodies were discovered in a grisly, bloody scene. I mean, really bad. Skulls were crushed, bodies were beaten, and someone had done in the horse. I mean, they shot the horse. That's crazy. No witnesses, I guess. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the siblings. It's really scary. Number 6, Edwin Bartlett. Edwin Bartlett, like many other people in the Victorian era, was in need of a good dentist. I could use one too. I need braces. I'll be so cute with braces. A lack of dental hygiene made for many issues back then. So, if you take away anything from this list today, folks, it's brush your teeth and go see your dentist. It's important. Well, he went to the dentist because his breath had been so bad, he had to sleep in separate beds from his wife. He had so much buildup and gunk in there. It was that bad. Gross. For me, it's because I fart in my sleep, or at least so I'm told. That's what everyone says. I don't know. At the time, Mrs. Bartlett asked her husband to pick up a large portion of chloroform because that was legal back then. You just pick up some chloroform. Okay, sure. What a time to be alive. He later was found with chloroform in his system, a large amount. The missus somehow convinced the court that she was innocent. A study done almost 100 years later confirmed it was her. Well, at least maybe it was her. We're, again, still not sure because it was so long ago.
Number 5, Sam Little. Known for being one of the worst serial killers in history, Sam has confessed to taking the lives of more than 90 people, and while authorities have only been able to for sure connect him to 30, they say they have no reason to doubt the validity of his other confessions. They're like, yeah, it probably happened. If he's saying it, sadly, it's probably the truth. Sam was able to continue on this horrible path for so many years because of the fact that he committed these crimes in different states and kept moving, right? Different counties, of course, made it difficult to connect his crimes to one another. Man was on the move. In an interview with an investigator named Sergeant LeBlanc, as they discussed religious beliefs, they spoke about the nature of sin. Now, Sam stated he had no fear of God and said that God made him this way, so why should he ask for forgiveness? He's just trying to like be cool or something, try to make his life a haiku. All of a sudden we're like, no, you're just a crazy person. He said that God knew everything he did. He also allegedly told a few select people that he believed that he was the devil. There it is. See, it's always something. It's always the devil something. Devil made me blank. like, okay. Number 4, Arnie Johnston. Speak of the devil. This one's definitely the most well-known one. Here we go. This one's a little bit different. It's now a cinematic adventure, apparently. This trial was well known previously, but of course it became more widely spread as it was the trial in the newest Conjuring movie. That's what it was based off of. In 1981, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston killed 40-year-old Alan Bono in what appeared to have been a simple argument gone wrong quickly. It got way more twisted and confusing, right? When it came to his defense for the crime, he said the devil made him do it. Just like that third installment in the Conjuring franchise. The title, The Devil Made Me Do It, is in direct relation. This is not just a cool James Wan Conjuring title. This is the real case. This was the first time in history that possession has been used in an American courtroom as a defense. Pretty interesting, right? You think about it. You hear these stories often, but it has to go somewhere. It has to go to court. This was the first time that happened. Arnie had been at the scene of about 3 exorcisms that had occurred prior to his alleged possession and then his, killing. And this is why there's so many believers that believe that he's actually possessed or that the devil made him do it because he was part of these exorcisms or whatever. Because he was guilty by association, a couple exorcisms, so now he's evil apparently. At the end of the day, the jury in the trial decided to convict him of manslaughter. Number 3, Adnan Kolak. This Turkish serial killer who was responsible for taking the lives of 11 women, who were all ages between 68 and 95, absolutely horrible. He was also responsible for 6 more crimes once he was convicted that were also elderly women. So again, there's more than we initially thought. Now down the road, he eventually got caught for these horrible crimes, thankfully, and he was sentenced to 6 death sentences as well as 40 years in prison, just to make sure, just to top it off. Right? I would hope that's the case, make it 80 years. Sure, doesn't matter at that point. The point is, see you never. Get the fuck out of here. Now, this was back in 1995 when he was first sentenced, but cut to 2004, the death penalty in Turkey was abolished, which meant that in May 2005, Adnan Kolak was released from jail. His nickname is the Artvin Monster, and he was released from jail. Yeah, I have a nickname for him personally, but I can't say any of those words on YouTube, so I'll just save that for later. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. This is twisted. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her horrible husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped and then later killed 10 victims. They kept them and then abused them for a while, horribly, before ultimately ending their lives. Now, it really was the most twisted situation. Just disgusting people, really. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to murder and receives 16 years. Her horrible husband was waiting for execution, but he died of cancer before meeting his demise. One of those things where you're like, close. You got close. Charlene got out and moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. So one of them's dead, one of them's absolutely free, and changes her name. Yep, sleeping fair. And finally, number 1, the Zodiac Killer. Of course, this one had to make it on the list because, why, of course. There's a plethora of terrifying people on this list here, but nothing is as terrifying as an uncaught serial killer. And the Zodiac is definitely the most prolific of them all. The Zodiac Killer took the lives of 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. He was most known for targeting young couples or a lone male cab driver, one of the two. Now, despite 2 people luckily and thankfully escaping his attempted evil doings, he still has never been caught. He was one of those losers who left notes and stuff for the police to find, thought he was like a DC villain, thought he was cool. One of those psychos. While no one's ever heard from the Zodiac since 1974, the case remains active in many different countries, and maybe one day we'll finally know who the real Zodiac Killer is.
Number 10, Tar and Feather. This is something my mom always said to me when I was being too loud, boisterous, or distracting her from a task at hand. I'm sorry, Mom, it's just what I do. Mind you, looking back, perhaps it wasn't my fault. Perhaps letting a hyper child eat chicken McNuggets and soda after watching a bunch of 007 movies was not the right choice, Mother. I used to be a big 007 fan. After running all over my house, my mom would say, "Son, if you don't settle down, I'm going to tar and feather you." Well, in the times of Vikings, this was a legit punishment and for legit criminals. The crook's head would be shaven and covered in tar, which even that alone sounds horrible. And then a poof, I guess you describe it, of duck feathers was thrown onto his stickiness. He then would have to run through a gauntlet and everyone would be tossing stones and bricks because, well, I guess tar and feathers weren't enough. If you made it out alive, then no further punishment was required. Number 9, fines. Surprisingly enough, one of the most common punishments of the Viking era was fines. Nothing deters criminals like owing the governing body some cold hard cash. Except a lot of criminals don't really have any money, hence why they would steal in the first place, so owing money isn't exactly a great deterrent in my opinion. However, fines varied on the severity of the crime and who the person was or what the person was, and the law of the land really. Viking civilizations didn't exactly have a written law and would differ from different lands. All I know is that in Skyrim, which is loosely based on that of Scandinavian folklore and Norse mythology, that when I get fined for committing a crime that I only did because I pushed the wrong button, I promise it was an accident, I immediately pay the fine and pickpocket it back. It's not so bad. You pay a fine, you get away. It's not so bad. Number 8, banishment. Hey, look over there, it's Skorgamor, said Ulfric, or someone of another Norse-like name like that. Don't worry, Norse sounds confusing to me too. What's not confusing, however, and very straightforward but still pretty harsh, is banishment. If someone was found guilty enough of a crime, they could be banished from the village, and in time of wild beast disease and, well, other Vikings eyeing your village the same way flies look at cow manure, it was dangerous to be alone for that extended period of time. So some people were forbidden to come back into town and don the name Skorgamor. We'll go with that. Good luck in the winter, that's all I have to say. That's a tough life. Number 7, outlawed. This one is kind of interesting. So oftentimes when choosing the punishment for a criminal, it came down to fines, banishment, and outlawing, and a lot of times all three. Outlawing went hand in hand with banishment. In a nutshell, it means you are no longer protected upon the laws of the land. So should someone maybe want a little revenge, there's not much you can do. Should have committed that crime there, cowboy. Like I said before, this was oftentimes done to those who were banished, so not only were they tossed out of the village, but also not protected by the village anymore. Pretty much leaving the criminal to nature and whatever she has to offer. And we all know Mother Nature, she can be a little rough sometimes. Whew. Number 6, rodeo. If you're gonna be dumb, you gotta be tough. This world is rough, if a man's gotta make it, he's gotta be tough. Wise words from a trailer park supervisor. Huh? This one is just crazy, stupid, and violent, so strap in folks. There was a trial, or a way of passage, if you want to call it that involved Grease, a cow, and a criminal. You take the angriest cow in your herd and you grease its tail up like a fat dude whose thighs have been chafing all day at a water park. The crook's hands would also be greased up. The cow was given a not too PETA friendly poke from a farm tool, and the idea was while the cow was rightfully mad, kicking, stomping, and mooing, the crook would have to hang on for as long as possible. If he did and didn't let go, then there was no charges. If he did fall off and slip and let go, then, well, so long von Schlurgenbergen-Florman or Ulfric. That's a Swedish name or something, I think. I don't know.
Number 5, the Doodler, another stupid nickname for another horrible unidentified killer. He received his nickname due to the fact that he would sketch his victims before taking their lives. Yeah, how sinister is that? You see that on TikTok, but this is like the evil, horrible version of that. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January 1974 to September 1975, and they specifically targeted the gay community. It's believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer, while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of the stigma and the sensitivity surrounding gay men at the time, the 3 who survived this monster's attacks were very reluctant when speaking to authorities for fear of being outed as a result of it. This of course has led to there being very little information for them to work with in terms of, actually identifying the person responsible. But for a while there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court. There's also a very real chance that authorities know who the killer is but just don't have the evidence to prove it in the court of law, which is also a terrifying thought. Number 4. The I-70. This unidentified killer is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest back in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off Interstate 70, I-70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it's believed that he may have been expecting a female employee at the time, and that's the only difference there. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes as well, considering the fact that each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was actually taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it's thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas back in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001. Number 3. Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities have given up just yet. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in the year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was just outside of a movie theater. Now, after committing this already horrific crime, he then took the money and then ran, just to make things even worse. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other details about him and who to contact with any information, all that good stuff, it gives a little bio on Jason, and it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. Yeah, it's crazy how many of these people are known for trying to flaunt their stolen lifestyle. Another thing the website reminds us is that he should be considered armed and dangerous at all times. Number 2, the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are, of course, serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been recently active, right? That's the horrible new news that we don't want to hear. Now, this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, and 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still, of course, very little to go on in terms of actually being able to identify this horrible human being. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. So there's work being done, although there's little evidence, there's still some momentum. And finally, number 1, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up, and unfortunately this led to him living a life committing a plethora of horrible crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. Now, by the time the 80s had rolled around, he had made a mistake during one of these awful crimes, and this led to his arrest. Now, once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed at that point to an insane amount of crimes. Just confessed to everything and just unloaded. Like, we're talking confessing to 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of doing. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So at that point they're like, yeah, we believe you, this is horrible. Pedro of course went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. That's why I had to put him on number 1 here. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years, but he was also released from there for good behavior. That's horrible.
Number 10, Alcatraz. It's the 1930s, and organized crime and gangsters have ruled over the city streets of America for at least a decade. At first, the crooks and wealthy gangsters were idolized for their lavish lifestyles and sticking it to the man attitude. Literally. A lot of these criminals are too wealthy and powerful to be caught, and all the smaller ones, well, they organize jailbreaks. A surprising amount, to be honest. Well, what if there was a place that was so inescapable, so dangerous, even for the most dangerous and lucrative criminal? Well, that's what Alcatraz was. A place for the most rotten, no-good criminals. And it was an example to others out there that Uncle Sam wasn't fooling around. Hence why Al Capone was sent there. And in case you were wondering, it wasn't a 5-star hotel. Surrounded by rough waters in San Francisco Bay, it was a fortress and a maximum security prison. Number 9, the pillory. As an actor, my greatest fear would be an audience that's turned on me. And they've reached for their summer fresh ripe tomatoes and have launched them onto stage left where I am reciting Shakespeare monologues quite poorly. Maybe that was just a fever dream, but what isn't a fever dream is humiliating someone in a pillory. Used back in ye olde times as a form of humiliation punishment, a means of exposing one to ridicule and embarrassment. Mind you, the design itself leaves you fairly vulnerable as both your head and arms are locked up in a not very comforting position. Something like this, it's not good, you don't like that. This is where the town can ridicule you. Name calling, spitting, slapping, and the aforementioned tomato toss. No thank you, I don't even like tomatoes. Not a big fan of tomatoes. Number 8. Tamashigiri, feudal Japan, a land of isolation, haikus, and cherry blossom trees in the divine wind. Speaking of divine wind, no, I'm just kidding. Oh, to be there and witness the art and majesty of the time. For me, and I'm sure a lot of others at home, the coolest part about feudal Japan is samurais, the knights for hire who became so powerful they basically became their own government. Pretty cool. While the samurai used a handful of different blades and tactics, none is more famous than the katana. Curved swords forged with great care and patience. The end result is a blade that's not only tough as steel, that could cut through just about any soft target. So after a blade was completed, it needed to be tested. Makes sense. The art of tamashigiri is taking criminals, crooks, and sadly oftentimes innocent folks, and seeing how well a katana could lob off a limb. If it works, you have yourself a blade worthy of a Jedi. If not, well, back to the drawing board. No blood loss here. Well, actually a lot. Number 7, electric chair. Ever seen The Green Mile? Yeah, I have a fear of electricity and sponges now too. The electric chair was a popular sentence in the early to mid 20th century for the truly awful and interesting members of our society. But after years of controversial use and horror, we no longer use it. Oh wait, just kidding, it's actually still used today. Now, I'm not here to make a statement on capital punishment, but imagine being in court and the judge looks at you and says, you know what, you look like you could use 2,000 volts at around 12 amps running through your body. Which, for all DIY electricians at home, is enough to make your self-wiring project your last. So, stay out of court. Number 6, Vlad the Impaler. You gotta love Vlad. Here you got a king and leader of a small European kingdom that is constantly being targeted by members of the previous dynasty who want him gone, and foreign invaders frothing at the mouth to take over his kingdom. Vlad, however, wasn't going to take any of this laying down. Vlad amassed his army and did his best to defend his kingdom. However, it's his horrible scare tactics that have him on this list, as anyone he caught that was thought to be an enemy of the state was impaled on a large wooden stake through the hindquarters. Ouch. And like the worst Christmas decoration ever, he left those poor saps on display for any who question his authority. There should be a field full of people on spikes. That's... oof. No thanks.
Number 5, Simon Leviev. Number 5 for Mr. Leviev. This is the funniest, it's not funny, but this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. I have to mention this guy. It's quite recent, and there's a documentary about him on Netflix. It's called The Tinder Swindler. Perhaps you've seen this. I threw this on, not really sure what to expect, I was doing some laundry. I was hooked. I had to watch this entire thing. This guy, he's wild. He would go on the dating app, he would go on Tinder, and he would talk to women. He would get to know them a bit, favorite color, favorite album, all that stupid stuff. But then he would convince them that he was the owner of an Israeli diamond company. He would have private jets, bottles, security, you named it. He even had a big jack dude named Peter. He had a big, strong man that would just follow him around. That's how you know it's the real deal. And then he would text them out of nowhere in peril. He would say his enemies are after him, like, diamond business enemies, whatever, deep stuff like that. And he sent these women pictures. He would send them photos of Peter, like big, strong Peter, the security guard, injured, right? It didn't look great at all. Simon would also send voice notes saying that he was being attacked and how his enemies are after him. And then he would ask for like $20,000. And it worked. He did this with multiple women, and it worked. It was horrible. It's the worst situation you can get yourself into. At the end of the day, he only got a 15-month sentence back in 2019. Number 4, Irina Christie. Any fans of Breaking Bad here? I slept on it for far too long. It's a good time. This next one might ring a bell or two. I don't know. Irina Christie, she was a 74-year-old calculus professor from Boston, and back in 2012, she was accused of running the same type of lab that Walter White was running. She didn't do it alone either. She had her own little Jesse Pinkman to go alongside, Her sidekick was her 29-year-old son, Grigory. Gotta keep it in the family, I guess. Reports from the Boston Globe detailed that a bomb squad had to go in their Somerville home, and they removed multiple hazardous material boxes, so they were just up to the worst in their own home. They were officially charged with the distribution of conspiracy to violate law and a violation in a school zone. Yeah, that's just, you can't do anything in a school zone. Especially something like this. This was all done by a 74-year-old calculus professor. Number 3, John Pyle. John Pyle is just a pile of garbage, absolutely. Now, because of the nature of his crimes, I can't get into them too, deeply on YouTube here, but let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kinds of criminals that ever existed. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to his crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence they found during said search, it was unspeakable. He was charged then with 30 different second-degree felonies, which could ultimately bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. He was arrested the same day and posted a bail bond of $90,000, as well as surrendering his passport. Now fast forward 16 months to October 23rd, 2017. John doesn't show up for his hearing. So now we have a fugitive on the run. Now, even though he gave up his passport, it is said that he was still somehow able to board a Carnival cruise ship. A Carnival cruise ship that was bound for Mexico. So he got off the ship when it arrived, and he never reboarded, and he's now yet to be located. Number 2, the River City Ripper. We talked about Jack the Ripper numerous times on this channel. Well, there's another one. Everyone's gotta have cool nicknames like they're wrestlers or DC villains. This is so cringe. Well, this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These crimes took place between August 2020 and April 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and then being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still little to go on in terms of being able to actually identify this horrible human being. That's why I wanted to include it, because I'm like, hey, hopefully, never know. Least I can do. The FBI was contacted shortly after said survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created this profile of this unidentified killer. Now, these crimes were all just random acts of violence as well that all completely occurred unprovoked. The case has gained a lot of attention, but still the monster remains at large. So look into it. I implore you to take a glance, especially if you live in the area. And finally, number 1, Belle Gunness. We'll end on a dark one. A real dark one, of course. Originally born in Norway, Belle Gunness moved to the United States at age 22. Gunness then married her first husband in 1884. They owned a candy store and all was going well until a fire out of nowhere just destroyed their entire business. It even took out 2 family members. It forced them to collect life insurance, but then in 1890, Gunness put out a life insurance policy on her husband and he ended up dying that same day. Ha! What are the odds? That's crazy. That's bizarre timing. Good thing she did that, huh? In 1892, Gunness married her second husband, and 8 months after their wedding, he died from a skull injury and she collected his life insurance. What? That's 2 now. What's going on? I don't know. What a coincidence. Finally, in 1908, Gunness's farm burned down, and upon investigation, 11 bodies were all found. Now, it was never officially determined whether or not Gunness was one of those souls. She may have escaped, who knows, but that still leaves around 14 victims that she still has to answer for.
Number 10, Robert Rustango. This is a weird one. When I got to high school, cell phones and meme culture were already a mainstay in our culture. It wasn't its infancy, but it was there. I was the first generation to have teachers tell us to put our phones away. By the time I got to senior year, smartphones were pretty much, well, like they are today. And there was a class full of rowdy teenagers more interested in planking than, what our anthro teacher had to say. Wasn't a big fan of my anthro teacher, she wasn't very nice. Constant buzzing, ringing, and popular girls walking in late to class with a bench handbag twice the size of our desks. Good times. Teachers need a raise. Well, Judge Robert Rustango in 2005 was already fed up with cell phones. And that's even way before we were arguing over if the dress was black and blue or white and gold. Remember that? I do. Judge Rustango was so fed up with phones in his court that he told everybody, if it goes off again and no one claims it, if it's not theirs, if it's yours, you're all going to jail. You're all going to be thrown in jail for contempt of court. After a cell phone did ring, he he wasn't bluffing as he threw everybody in jail for contempt of court. Mind you, they only stayed a couple hours and they were eventually released, the charges were dropped, and a few years later he was fired. So yeah, kind of a weird story, but wow, keep your cell phones off, you know, you go to jail. Number 9, Michael Cinconetti, the first. This guy's pretty interesting, a judge from Ohio with creative punishments. For the first case of his creative punishment, it involved a local high school student who was fed up with something. What? I'm not sure, but it was probably a legit reason. Well, with his edgelord rage, he mowed an offensive abbreviation in the high school lawn. Kind of a weird thing to do. I don't know why you'd mow something offensive in the lawn, like, oh, I hate the system, I'm gonna mow their lawn. So when the crook was caught and brought before Judge Cinconetti, well, the young mischief maker wasn't ready. Instead of jail time or juvenile hall, he had the option, instead of going there, to mow the entire lawn of the high school with a manual push mower. It doesn't sound that bad, but if you've ever actually used a manual push mower before, then you know how labor intensive that could be. Lessons learned, I hope. They're not fun. After after a day of using it, you gotta take the blades off, sharpen them, you gotta oil. Oh, it's no good, no good. Number 8, Michael Cinconetti, the second part. Here we go. This guy's got a couple under his belt. It's pretty cool. Another youth in trouble of being sucked into the justice system of America. And there's Judge Cinconetti to save the day. In another case, a troubled youth had spray painted graffiti where graffiti shan't be. Truth be told, I think graffiti adds color to the city, especially downtown alleys. I mean, how am I supposed to know whose turf I'm on? Not that I could read it anyway. However, the youth was facing up to 10 days in jail, but instead, Judge Cinconetti offered that the criminal Rembrandt use his talents for good. He was to paint an old beat-up handrail black. except he had to do it with a toothbrush instead of a paintbrush. Now, given my paint background, I'd say he got off pretty easily. The worst part would have been the fumes from the paint, but then again, even some folks enjoy that too, so I don't know. Wouldn't be that bad. You actually get a lot done. It's still a brush. It might be a small brush, but you still get a lot done. Number 7, Michael Cinconetti III. Part 3 on this guy. This guy's crazy. Last time I talked about Judge Cinconetti on this list, but I think this is the best one actually. This is pretty crazy. Look, sometimes youths get themselves into trouble for a whole slew of reasons. I'm sure even you guys at home agree that, you know, we all make mistakes when we're young. Everyone has. Well, this one's about someone who is all grown up now. A woman who skipped out on a cab fare. Oh, she needed the money for a new pair of shoes because when she was brought to Cinconetti's court, her sentence was to walk 30 miles in 48 hours. Yikes! For Canadian fans out there, that's like walking from Toronto to Newmarket. Oh, no thank you. Yeah, I know, right? That's the worst. But to be fair, she did ride and dash, so always pay your due, folks. I don't know. Otherwise, you'll be walking. You'll be doing the Terry Fox run, buddy. You're out. That'd be the worst one for me, dude. Are you kidding me? It's like, listen, we know you're gonna walk. No! Number 6, Tough Love. It's Friday night. The glow of 2 PC monitors illuminates your face. An ice cold Monster energy drink has just hit your empty stomach. Good thing you can order chicken mac nuggets right at your house. Living in your mom's basement is great, except when other gamers call you out for being a sweat and you really have no comeback because you are living in your mom's basement, so it's kind of tough. Yes, the life of millennial mid-20s who didn't move out of their parents' houses. Oh, Mom, I can't pause the game right now. It's an online match. God! Well, how about this case from Andalusia, Spain, where a 25-year-old man was taking his parents to court because they cut off his allowance. Yeah, question, who's still getting allowance at 25? I'm 25, someone give me allowance? I like allowance. Give me allowance. Ugh, worst! Well, seeing as this was completely ludicrous, the judge not only sided with the parents, but actually forced him on court order to move out of their parents' house and get a job. You thought it was gonna go your way, but now who's the clown? The sweaty guy in the basement. Number 5, Harriet Boozwell. Christmas morning 1872 was a good morning for everyone waking up except Harriet Boozwell, who was found carved up like a Christmas goose. Oh god. The night before, she had attended a fancy Christmas ball, as you do back then, and she was seen leaving with a well-dressed, handsome man, a foreigner, most likely German, as witnesses report. She was found the next day with multiple lacerations, and yeah, it wasn't pretty. The police eventually followed a trail of evidence to a German man in South America, but because of the man's pleasant demeanor and solid alibi, he was dropped as a suspect, even though his maid claims of cleaning a bloody handkerchief that night of her passing. No one else was ever arrested for the crime, and that was the end of that one. Oh yeah, the bloody handkerchief, yeah, that was my brother. I had nothing to do with that. Yeah, it was not me, sorry. Number 4, Elizabeth Jackson. Surprise, surprise! Another mangled corpse was found in the River Thames. That's weird. This time, the lower half of a woman and legs. As the days went on, more and more parts were discovered, and after another bad glue and paste project, it was identified to be Elizabeth Jackson, a young woman who had left her home in shame of an unwedded pregnancy. Ooh, scandalous. Sadly, she ended up in River Thames, and no one is sure who did it at all. Some claim actually it was Jack the Ripper, and while it does make sense, experts don't all agree. Thus, it is another unsolved mystery. God, why is it happening so much back then? What the hell's going on? God. Number 3, Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. That's a nice nurse. What a nice thing to say about a nice young lady. Maybe one of the most famous crimes ever, actually. In a nutshell, it looked like Lizzie had done it. It was a closed and shut case. It seemed like a pretty concrete open and shut case, but yet again, somehow, she got off free. She claimed that she was in the barn when it happened, and then she discovered the bodies. Now, most of the topics on this list are a whodunit, but I mean, for sure this one, we can't be so serious to not ignore the facts here, right? I mean, she was the only person there. Who could have done it? Well, unsolved, apparently. Oh, God. All right. She didn't do it. Number 2, the West Ham vanishings. Just east of London between the years of 1882 and 1899, a few women disappeared and then were left in parks, or at least their bodies were. I don't know why that keeps happening. It's 1800s is weird. And while we don't know very much about Jack the Ripper, we know even less about these cases, as they've somewhat fallen into obscurity. Naturally, police thought it could be Jack the Ripper again, but it's also likely that it's not. I'm starting to think Victorian London isn't the safest place for a lady to be. I don't like this is going. That's all the information on that one. It was like, yeah, they died, we don't know who did it. Oh, okay. Alright. I'll put that in. Number 1, Carrie Brown. This one takes place in 1881 Manhattan. Carrie Brown was found deceased in a hotel room. A man named Amir Abi was arrested and spent 11 years in jail for the crime, before being proven innocent and released. So what's so crazy about this whole thing? Well, given the same style, the running theory was that, again, this was Jack the Ripper, even though this was New York and not London. So the question is really, who did Carrie in? And if it was Jack the Ripper, why is he in New York, and how many more did he really commit in London and New York? Man, that's scary, dude. I don't know.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Luis Garavito. Luis gained a nickname from the media of the Beast, and I think that's a great indication of the nature of his atrocious crimes. He is said to be one of the worst serial killers in the entire world, and it is believed that his victim count is up in the 300s range, which is absolutely shocking. He confessed to 147 crimes, and he was found guilty on 139 of those counts, which put his sentence at 1,853 years, but here's the thing. This trial took place in Colombia, where he lives, and there is a law, or was a law, which puts the maximum sentence to 30 years. He was sentenced in 1999, meaning there's really only a few years left of this sentence. He also had years taken off of his sentence because he assisted police in the search to recover some of the victims' bodies, which means that just this year, in 2023, he is eligible for parole. Okay, that's great. According to Luis himself, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have William Bonin. This horrible person is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June of 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions, he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning, he claimed innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so the mother could be at peace and her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cops, they would get me a hamburger." Right, just gonna take a moment and let that sink in. At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 8 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrifying crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets by night. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson, who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 7 spot today, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a much higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old. Of course, people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone might actually be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a called Mevacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicky, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found those people rude or quote too demanding. Okay, Vicky, get a different job then. I don't know. In our number 6 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared just like a happy couple of harmless hippies. We all know, though, not to judge a book by its cover, in the end they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco held so many witches. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked with on a farm because they said that he was a demon. The final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life. Neither of them have ever shown any kind of remorse for what they've done.
Number 5, Meat Hook. Sometimes when given fines, it wasn't always cash value that was taken. Sometimes if the crime was heinous enough, the evildoer's property and items were taken instead. Well, sometimes folks didn't like having their stuff taken, which makes sense, they put up a fuss. No one likes their stuff getting taken. Just ask George Carlin, he knows a lot about that stuff. Everybody loves their stuff. In order for authorities to take possessions from the convicted, they would slice their ankles open, which, just talking about that makes me sick. And then for good measure, tie them up and suspend them from the ceiling from a beam in their house. No, not unaliving them, keeping them very alive, just severely hindering their movement and ability to say, hey, get your hands off my limited edition Obi-Wan Kenobi Lego set. That one's mine. Number 4, Tree Hugger. I hope you folks at home aren't eating during this video. It's about to get a little Mortal Kombat in here, if you will. Even though I watch videos when I eat. Carpet cleaning videos, anyone? Where's my lunch? You know what I mean? I do weird things like that. I don't know. The second most horrible sentence the Vikings could bestow upon their criminals and dredges of their society involved a tree. I'll get to the first one later, it's pretty heinous. It involved a tree, a knife, and a squishy rope. Squishy rope? What? Yeah, I'll get to that. Trees being great symbols of Norse mythology and culture, it made sense to do this here. Shout out to Yggdrasil. Oh, cool stuff. You take your perpetrator and you carve open his belly like a high school jack-o'-lantern contest, and you pull his intestines out, and you keep pulling them out till you've got enough to wrap around the tree. And you basically tie him there. Except you don't wrap him around the tree, he walks himself around the tree until he's out of string, like a sick yo-yo. Oh, gross. This was extremely painful and not quick at all, as humans can live for a couple hours without their squishy rope inside their belly. Not to mention it probably attracted wild animals for a quick and easy meal. Not a good way to go. Don't recommend that. That's sick. That's twisted. Number 3, drowning. Given the naval status of the Scandinavian nations at the time, it makes sense that they use water. It's simple, it's cheap, effective, and there's a lot of it. When a serious enough crime was committed, sometimes people were drowned, or in later terms they ran out of oxygen underwater, tried to breathe underwater, overpowered by the tide, or was left unattended by the city swimming pool, if you catch my drift. Number 2, trial by fire. There's water, now there's fire, of course. Well, if cold water was too much for you, then this should warm you up. Trial by fire was more of a punishment, and less of a lethal one, if you will. If you survived the ordeal, that meant God was on your side. Thus, they couldn't be guilty, because yeah, that totally works. The trial by fire included a couple different heat-based trials. No amount of red potion or Goron's tunic would get you through this. There was one version that saw people dip their hands in boiling water or oil, which right there, you ever seen those like Wimmis commercials where anyway. Walking across hot coals, which can be proven to be done without getting hurt. I saw it on Mythbusters once, so if it's on Mythbusters, that's just truth, folks, come on. Lastly, the one thing that I think is the worst is holding a hot stone or iron for a determined period of time. Yes, how long do you think you could hold onto a red hot iron? I'd say not long. Even with seconds of exposure, you would have close to third-degree burns, probably third-degrry burns on the palm of your hands, and long before polysporin, painkillers, and toilet paper. Not a good combo. You have a burnt hand, you go to do that, you know? Ooh, that's not gonna be good. You're gonna get a little sick. Number 1, this is the worst one on the list, the Blood Eagle. The Vikings were very creative, to say the least. I just had to include this one, it's awful. And in the style of Mortal Kombat, of course, you take a crook, you take his back, and you rip his rib cage out of his back. It was cut out from the chest and positioned in such a way that it looked like an eagle with its wings flying, just, you know, with a lot of blood, hence the Blood Eagle. After that amount of carnage, you would bleed out and experience excruciating pain. Not as common as other things on this list, it was saved for the worst of the worst, but yeah, it is the worst. No thank you. Number 10, Bonnie and Clyde. They kind of wrote the book on couples doing bad things, where if a bad couple happens to make headlines, they could be described as a real Bonnie and Clyde, a modern Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were as thick as thieves, 2 peas in a pod. Merciless crooks that formed a gang in the early 1930s and wreaked havoc across middle America by robbing banks and exercising their Second Amendment a little too liberally. They were becoming a real thorn in the side for law enforcement. To make matters worse, they were becoming somewhat idolized for their crimes by some of the public. Not good. However, not even a Ford V8 could help them outrun the law for too long, as one day in 1934, it saw the young couple ambushed by agents. And by agents, I mean they turned the car and the crooks into Swiss cheese. A lot of blam blam going on, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't good. Number 9, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Despite Canada being a majestic land full of moose, mounties, and rivers of maple syrup and politeness, it's not all fine and dandy up here, folks. Nope. We have our fair share of whack jobs too. Take for example Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, a Canadian couple who in the early 90s took part in some heinous crimes, including the delifing of Carla's own sister. Ooh, and maybe even some sexual related crime. It was Nazi, it was bad. When it came down to the trial, Paul was going away for a very long time. Nothing was going to change that. However, Carla got the plea deal of a lifetime and got a fraction of the time compared to Paul. However, videotapes found after the case show that Carla was much more involved than previously thought and would have given her a sentence much closer to Bernardo, maybe even the same. She's currently a free woman. Gross. Number 8, Charles Manson. Okay, this one isn't so much a couple as it is like a throuple or like a grouple. Lots of people intertwined. Anyway, just a weird group of hippies. But Charles Manson was involved, romantically speaking, with his family members or cult or whatever you want to call it, rather. You can't get much more scandalous than Manson. The Manson family took refuge at Spawn Ranch, an abandoned ranch that had been used as a film lot in the past, located in sunny California, Los Angeles. The family often experimented with mind-altering substances, the same ones that made the Beatles the Beatles. Unfortunately, it wasn't all fun-loving and vegan commune happiness, brother, at Spawn Ranch, as the family became involved in numerous criminal activities, which eventually involved in the delifing of an up-and-coming movie star, Sharon Tate. You ask your mom and dad about her, they'll tell you, they'll remember. If you've ever seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, then you'd also understand. I try to relate things, make it more relatable for you, but ask your mom and dad, they'll tell you about the 60s. Number 7, Susan and James Carson. Susan and James both had some troubled backgrounds. Can't have a criminal with that one, really. They fell in love and, well, they fell in love with the same illicit substance that made the Rolling Stones, the Rolling Stones. They changed their last name to Bear, and well, it just gets worse after this point. God had written letters to them to do so. Eventually, they declared themselves witch hunters and began a spree of violent crimes. Because that's what you do. The bodies and evidence kept piling up and they kept disappearing. A manifesto was eventually found calling for the assassination of then President Ronald Reagan and late night comedy legend Johnny Carson. No relation. They were sentenced to life and remained suspects in a bunch of unsolved cases. Ooh, I don't like that. That's gross. Number 6, the Rosenbergs. 1950s America. What a beautiful place. Imagine, if you will, you have a suburb with green grass, white picket fences, and a starter home. Dad buries his PTSD from the war and takes out his anger on the family sometimes, even violently. Mom is a stay-at-home mom who's on so many prescriptions she's forced to lay down during the day with a vodka martini just to get her strength back from a headache. Oof. All while under the threat of atomic annihilation. Oh, America the brave, America the beautiful. Except the biggest thing every American feared back then was actually communists. Yeah, I know, right? Who would have thought? Communists coming to take over because they threatened the great American way of life. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg looked just like any other couple you'd find in the suburbs, except they were Soviet spies. Spies that aided a group that was leaking atomic secrets to the Soviets, allowing the Soviets to have a nuclear program years before the Americans suspected them of having one. Both de-lifed by the state after being found guilty. However, Ethel wasn't as guilty as previously thought and could have received a lighter sentence. Oops. Our bad. Oh, she's innocent? You know what I mean? They flip the switch. Oh, dude, I already flipped the switch, dude. Too late. Number 5, the National Razor. Once the National Razor had been busted out to get rid of King Louis and Marie Antoinette, well, it simply couldn't be put away. Like an ocarina song that you can't remember. That menu stays open for a while. And remember the songs. Now, when an autocratic leadership like the French monarch was collapses, it creates a power vacuum. Plus, the country was starving and about to go to war, so they were trying times to say the least. So how do we quell the royalist movement and keep the revolution alive? Said Robespierre. I know. Let's bring out the National Razor on overdrive. Ooh, good idea. During a short time period, thousands of people met their end to the guillotine for anti-revolution behavior, right up until Robespierre also met his end the same way for anti-revolution behavior. But at that time, anything could be anti-revolution behavior, so a lot of people off of the head. Number 4, the Brazen Bull. It's ancient Greece, and you're tired of the same old punishments and sentencing. Oh, so bored of everything. That's when someone rolls in the Brazen Bull, or more like carries it in, because I doubt it had wheels. At first you see a life-size bull sculpture made out of bronze. Not that impressive, you think, until someone opens the hidden door. What's this, you say, in visible confusion? That's when an ancient Greek version of a cheesy used car salesman slaps that bad boy on top twice. Bonk bonk. The hollow metallic sound puts you at ease. You're already reaching for your drachma. Now what's the point of this bull? Well, simply put a perpetrator inside, light a fire underneath, and cook him. And there's your sentence. Brand new, it's lovely, you're gonna love it, it's great. I can't speak, that's what it is. Number 3, Vlad again? What? Yes, Vlad the Impaler again, and for an equally horrific sentence. Oh boy, here we go. There's a tale of 2 religious envoys making their way to Vlad's castle, past all the people on spikes and pikes and whatnot. Ooh, gross. Which he and the castle were inspirations for Dracula, remember, which is kinda cool, makes sense. And when these Gentiles got there and met Vlad, the first thing they were asked to do was remove their hats. Now, the kind depends on what version of the story is being told, but regardless, the religious men refused to remove their hats. So Vlad had his henchmen nail the hats into their skulls so that they may never remove them ever again. Oh my god, that is horrible. That's so bad. That's so bad. Number 2, Molten Metal. This one is straight out of Mortal Kombat, a traditional sentence that comes from the Middle East, Israel, and the Ottoman Empire. Basically, you take your perp and you restrain him so he cannot move from what Jigsaw-esque trap he's about to be unleashed upon. During this, the local blacksmith has been melting down some metals until they are in liquid form. Remember, there's 3 forms of matter: liquid, gas, and solids, remember that, and sometimes plasma, depends who you ask. Then, right from the crucible, the liquid hot magma is poured in the mouth of the crook. I will let you imagine how much pain and screaming it caused. It was a lot. Number 1, flaying. Did I say the last one was from Mortal Kombat? No, now see this one is one of Scorpion's best, I promise. A perpetrator is put on a table where, alive, this is done, and it's, oh god, I get lightheaded just thinking about it. The crook is slowly and precisely skinned like a big game hunt, and then they're left like a big red meaty surprise, kind of like the Titans look like an Attack on Titan. It's awful, don't do it. And we're better than that now.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Belle Gunness. Belle Gunness was a Norwegian-American serial killer who is believed to have killed over 40 people, including her own family, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Belle was born in Norway in 1859 and immigrated to the United States in 1881. She settled in Chicago, where she married her first husband and started a family. This was all fine and well until things soon took quite the turn. Belle began to collect life insurance policies on her family members murders, and if you're a true crime fan, you likely know where this is going. She went on to eventually kill them in a fire. She then moved to LaPorte, Indiana, where she purchased a farm and continued to lure wealthy suitors to her property just to kill them for their money and assets. She was known for her physical strength and was able to bury her victims' bodies on her property. Belle's crimes were discovered in 1908 when a fire destroyed her farm and the remains of several of her victims were found. We love when the villain is brought to justice, but unfortunately, that did not happen here. Belle herself was never found, and it is believed that she may have faked her own death and fled the country. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dorothea Puente. You know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, this certainly is a case of that. If you took a glance at Dorothea and knew nothing about her, you'd probably assume she was someone's kind grandma who also had some cookies and a glass of milk waiting, but that could not be any further from the actual truth. In reality, she was actually a serial killer, and she decided to prey upon some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, people who were seeking help and assistance. Dorothea operated a large rooming house that was set in a large Victorian home in Sacramento, California. The residents who would often stay there were people who struggled with different substances such as alcohol, people who had been in mental hospitals, and the elderly. All of these people were receiving social security checks, and if they suddenly vanished, she figured no one would ask. In 1982, they did begin to vanish, but of course their social security checks were continually being cashed. As it turns out, Dorothea was taking their lives and then their money. She has now been called the landlady from hell. In our number 8 spot today, we have Yang Xinhai. You might be familiar with Yang already, as he is quite a notorious name in Chinese criminal history. Also known as the Monster Killer, Yang was a Chinese serial killer who killed at least 67 people between 2000 and 2003. Yang was born in 1968 in the central Chinese province of Henan, and he had a troubled childhood. He began his killing spree in 2000 when he started breaking into houses in rural areas and killing entire families. He targeted mainly farmers and migrant workers who were often living alone in isolated areas. Yang was eventually caught in 2003 after a massive manhunt, and he was found to be suffering from a mental illness. He confessed to his crimes and was sentenced to death in 2004. His execution was carried out in 2004 by firing squad, and his case is considered one of the most heinous and disturbing in Chinese criminal history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Pedro Lopez. Pedro is a man who lived a life committing some of the most horrific crimes I've ever heard of throughout South America in the 1970s. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, and this thankfully led to his arrest. Once in police custody, he began to basically explain his entire life story, and he confessed to an astronomical amount of crimes. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994. I'm like, great. Just before I was born. Nice. He wasn't just sent home straight away and instead was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there. So aside from the crimes he committed, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Yeah, he just disappeared. That's awesome. Love it. In our number 6 spot today, we have another Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Also known as the Pedrino Matador, he is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and 1970s. He did have quite a difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually, really sadly, harmed and killed his mother, so this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in his life, and Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, starting with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and very unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I'm sure we can all feel sympathy for the things Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do.
Number 5, penalty of the sack. Man, this one is just so brutal. Here's one from ancient Rome because we gotta mix it up a little bit. Some modern, some from the past. Here we go. I would not wish this upon my worst enemy. So once found of a worse enough crime to deserve this, you would be placed in a large leather sack. But because Romans are super nice and don't want you to be lonely, they give you some pets to keep you company. Also placed in the sack with you is a chicken, a dog, a monkey, and a snake. Wow, that sounds like quite the party. You might get a little thirsty in there having so much fun, so then the animal squad entourage in you is thrown into a body of fast moving water just to cool off. How nice. All jokes aside, this is a horrible and brutal method that has several animal agencies looking for a time machine just to talk to the Romans and ask them, hey man, not cool, you know? That's crazy. I can't even imagine that. Have you ever been whitewater rafting before? That's that plus a monkey and a snake. Oh, I don't like that. Number 4, Xmas Slammer Blues. Nobody wants their Christmas to get ruined. Even the people that say they hate Christmas. How can you say no to a gift? I know I can. I love gifts. Well, Bettina Young, a woman from Ohio, knows what it's like to have her Christmas ruined. Young had been involved in a driver's license scandal, which, given some drivers on the road today, makes a lot of sense where they got their license from. I don't know. Well, her sentence was very unusual to say the least. She was to spend 5 Christmases in jail. No, not 5 literal years as Christmases. What they actually mean is she was to spend 5 Christmases in jail, meaning all the other days of the year she would be free, on probation of course, but come Christmas time she wouldn't be cutting turkey, she would be in jail away from her family thinking about what she has done. That's kind of weird though. It's like, hey guys, I'll see you after Christmas, I gotta go. Where are you going? I'm going to jail. I'm just gonna spend a weekend in jail. You know, I'm just gonna spend a weekend in jail. No big deal. Number 3, hip hop and buck. There's really nothing worse than a neighbor who's too loud, especially for their own good. You can go house searching in this market, look all over, and finally find the right place. Ooh, too bad your neighbor is a metalhead and doesn't care about the bylaws. Uh-oh. Listen, I can jam to Metallica all day, but it is best to respect those around you, just the way I feel. Well, Andrew Vactor was that neighbor, and after finding himself in court, he was facing a $150 fine. Or he had the option to listen to classical music for 20 hours and pay only $35. He got about 15 minutes into Bach before he got up and decided to pay the $150 fine. He said he was late to band practice, but in actuality it was more of he didn't want to listen to the music, which he was doing because he was loud and making people listen to music that they didn't want to listen to. It's, how the tables have turned. Number 2, Ash Tower. This one's from ancient Persia. So basically, you get a large wooden tower, say about 3 stories. And on the inside, you get yourself a nice fire going. Nice big fire going. You let it burn for a couple of days to create a nice pile of ash. Now, you just need a perpetrator to toss in there. As if that weren't enough, the tower has a wheel and a pole in the center that allows an operator on the outside to stir you up like a cake batter from hell. Thus, your punishment would be to spend time in a swirling dust storm of hot fire, ash, and horribleness. God, that sounds awful. Oof, no thanks. And number 1, milk and honey. This one's just so diabolical. I can't even James Bond villains are saying, oh, that's a bit much, isn't it? And the chief, well, you know what the chief said. He said that's not it. A very unique punishment from, again, ancient Persia. It goes as follows. You take your perpetrator and you tie him down to a boat so both arms and legs are bound, something like that. Then you come by every day to a boat that's hovering near the shore and force feed the crook milk and honey until they cannot take it anymore. It often leads to a boat full of refunded lunch, human waste, or even sometimes a crocodile might come by for some free lunch, brought to you by the judicial system of ancient Persia. Ooh, no thank you. No thanks.